My name is Willow, and I am 28 years old, a restaurant consultant who built everything from nothing. I never expected the night of my in-laws' 30th anniversary to turn into my personal humiliation reel, but Diane, my mother-in-law, had a talent for cruelty dressed in pearls and politeness. The dinner was at Lumiere, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, where reservations are near impossible to get. My father-in-law, Harold, had called me personally weeks earlier to invite Ethan and me. Ethan, my husband, had to fly to Chicago for business last minute, but he told me to go anyway. "You know, Mom," he said, zipping up his suitcase. "She loves the pageantry. Just show up and be your usual graceful self." I should have known better. When I walked into the restaurant, I knew something was off. The table was full, 10 perfectly arranged place settings all occupied. I had no seat. Diane looked up from her wine glass with that smug smile she always wore when she won something, only she knew was a competition. "Willow," she said, feigning surprise. "Oh dear, I thought when Ethan said he could not come, you would not either. We gave your seat to the Andersons, they just got back from Europe. We simply had to catch up." Her voice was sugar-coated venom, and her eyes sparkled with triumph. The other guests stared in silence. Rachel, Ethan's sister, looked away, her cheeks red with shame. Harold opened his mouth, clearly confused, but Diane was already waving him down. "No worries, dear," she added. "I am sure a more affordable place nearby would suit you better." That was the moment something inside me stopped shrinking. As I stood there, excluded on purpose publicly by a woman who had never once truly welcomed me, I remembered something she clearly did not know I had helped save Lumiere 6 months ago. I took a deep breath, met her gaze, and smiled, not because I accepted her insult, but because I knew I had a card she did not even know I held. And I was about to play it. Diane had always made it clear I did not belong. From the moment Ethan brought me home for dinner 5 years ago, I saw it in her eyes, the silent judgment, the smile that never reached past her teeth. I was not from the right zip code. My parents ran a small auto repair shop, and I paid my way through college working 3 jobs. I never needed handouts, and that seemed to offend her more than if I had. She once asked, half laughing, if my family ever used silverware or just ate straight from the pot. Ethan tried to buffer the tension, but deep down, I knew she wanted someone who came with country club connections, not contractor calluses. Still, I kept showing up. Birthdays, holidays, fundraisers, always well-dressed, polite, and smiling through the condescension. I told myself I could win her over if I proved I was good enough. But being good enough was never the problem. The problem was that I reminded her of everything she worked to erase: humble beginnings, grit, the kind of struggle that does not fit into polite society. I built my career by helping restaurants recover from the brink of closure, bringing in fresh systems, redesigns, and profit strategies. I never needed credit. I just wanted to do work that mattered. But that night at Lumiere, after she gave my seat away and suggested I find something more affordable, I knew grace was no longer my currency. If you have ever been in a room where someone made you feel invisible on purpose, comment the word "yes" and subscribe for more true stories that turn quiet disrespect into undeniable power. You are not alone. What Diane did not know was that 6 months earlier, Lumiere had been on the verge of shutting down. I had worked with Chef James Bennett to redesign the menu, restructure staff training, and relaunch their entire brand. I never told Diane because I did not need her approval. But now her favorite weapon, public image, was about to become my greatest defense. I was not just someone who got left off the guest list. I was someone this place owed its survival to. And I was done shrinking for a woman who only felt tall by making others feel small. I stood there clutching my coat like it was the only armor I had left. Every eye at that table flicked toward me, then away. No one spoke. Even Harold, who had invited me personally, just stared down into his wine, as if hoping the linen napkin on his lap could swallow him whole. Diane's voice, syrupy and smug, echoed in my ears. "We just assumed you would not come without Ethan," as if my presence only held value when tethered to her son. The Andersons, seated comfortably in what should have been my chair, offered polite, uncomfortable smiles. Rachel tried to mouth an apology, but I could not even meet her eyes. I felt like I had walked into a trap wearing heels and hope. I almost turned around, almost let her win. But something in me locked into place the quiet fury of a woman who had spent years trying to earn approval from someone who built their entire identity around exclusion. My heels clicked a little sharper as I walked toward the maitre d'. Michael recognized me instantly. "Miss Willow," he said surprised. "Chef Bennett will want to see you?" And just like that, the atmosphere shifted. He disappeared into the kitchen, and moments later, the swinging doors burst open. Chef James Bennett strode out like a storm in pressed whites. He scanned the room, spotted me, and his face lit up. "There she is!" he said loudly, wrapping me in a firm handshake that turned every head in the dining room. "The woman who saved Lumiere. I have been meaning to thank you in front of people who matter." A silence fell over the table behind me. Diane's wine glass trembled. "We have a private table ready for you, Willow. Chef's tasting menu on the house with wine pairings. You made this place what it is, and we are forever grateful." I did not need to look back to know every jaw had dropped. I was not just part of this story, now I was the reason it still existed. And as I followed James through the dining room, past every stunned expression, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Power not borrowed, not married into, but earned. I could feel the weight of every stare as I followed Chef James through the dining room. The clink of silverware had stopped conversations, paused mid-sentence. From the corner of my eye, I saw Rachel lean in and whisper something to Diane, who sat frozen, her fingers rigid around the stem of her wineglass. The very restaurant she had chosen to make me feel small was now raising me above her. The maitre d' opened the velvet rope to the chef's table, a private candlelit corner, with a view into the open kitchen, a place reserved for celebrities, critics, and people whose names mattered. And now, for me, James pulled out my chair himself. "We never forgot what you did, Willow," he said, his voice loud enough for anyone listening. Lumiere was a week from shuttering. "Your operational restructure, supplier renegotiations, even that brunch concept you saved us. Let me return the favor tonight." He turned to Michael. "Give her the signature tasting. I want every dish that has her fingerprint on it." I smiled graciously, my heart thudding, but my posture tall. I had no interest in revenge for revenge's sake. But this moment, this justice delivered, not by vengeance, but by truth, was more than I ever expected. Back at Diane's table, tension radiated like heat. I could feel it. The hum of embarrassment, the stunned silence of people watching a mask crumble in real time. She had not just excluded me, she had tried to erase me. And instead, I was being honored. Midway through the first course, Rachel quietly walked over and sat next to me. She did not say anything at first. Then she whispered, "Thank you for not letting her define you. We should have stood up for you sooner." I looked at her, no malice in my voice, and said, "You still can." Because this was never just about a chair or a dinner. This was about every woman who has been made to feel like a placeholder. I was done apologizing for existing in rooms I had earned my place in. Tonight, I was not the guest. I was the story. And Diane was no longer the one writing it. Diane could not hold her composure. By the time the third course arrived, citrus-glazed duck, a menu edition I had recommended months ago, she was already pushing back her chair. The woman who spent decades mastering the art of control now looked flushed, unsettled, cracking beneath the weight of her own performance. She walked straight to my table heels, sharp against marble, her pearls swinging like a noose. "Was this your plan?" she hissed, voice low but cutting. "To embarrass me, to flaunt your little contribution, and humiliate this family in front of everyone?" I set down my fork, slowly, not startled, not defensive. "No," I replied evenly, "but I will not apologize for being acknowledged in a room where I was deliberately erased." Chef Bennett reappeared politely, but firmly asking if everything was all right. Diane gave him a withering look, but he stood his ground. "Willow is a professional. She saved my business. That deserves respect." For once, Diane had no script. Her mouth opened, then closed. Silence fell heavy between us. That silence carried weight, years of microaggressions, unspoken slights, the simmering tension of a daughter-in-law she never accepted, because I did not fit her curated image. Ethan arrived moments later, earlier than expected. He had received Rachel's text and came straight from the airport. When he saw me seated at the chef's table and his mother standing like a defendant in a courtroom, he walked directly to my side. "Is this what we are doing now?" he asked Diane. "Public takedowns at your own anniversary." She started to speak, but Ethan held up his hand. "Enough. I love her. You do not have to like that, but you will stop trying to punish her for being everything you are not." Diane stood motionless. Then Harold joined us, finally speaking with conviction. "You crossed a line tonight, Diane. And for once, you are going to sit with it." She turned without a word and walked back to the table, but the celebration was already over. Her power, once absolute, had fractured. And for the first time, I felt the entire family see me, not as an outsider or accessory, but as someone who belonged. The aftermath was strangely quiet. Dinner ended early, and guests left with murmured goodbyes and sidelong glances. No one congratulated Diane on the evening. No one even toasted. For once, the matriarch had been outmaneuvered, and the silence spoke louder than applause ever could. Ethan and I left shortly after, hand in hand. That night, I did not sleep. I kept replaying her expression, not the anger, but the flash of something else behind her eyes. Fear, maybe. Or shame. 3 days later, I got a call from Harold. "She wants to speak with you. Alone," he said. I met Diane at her home, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. She waited in the sunroom, dressed plainly, no pearls, no audience. Just us. For a moment, she stared at me, like she was still calculating her next move. Then, without a trace of her usual composure, she said, "You remind me of me," before I learned how to erase it. That was not what I expected. She told me about growing up poor in a small town, wearing hand-me-downs and eating on mismatched plates. She married Harold not just for love, but for safety from that version of herself. "I buried her," she whispered, her voice cracking. "And then you walked in, proud of where you came from. Unapologetic. And I hated you for it, because I did not know how to be her again." It was not an apology, not quite. But it was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I listened. Not to forgive her, but to understand the rot beneath her cruelty. Generational shame is a poison. It does not just wound, it warps. And Diane had spent decades rewriting herself, only to see the truth walk through her door in heels and confidence she once abandoned. Before I left, she said, "I do not expect anything from you. But I am sorry I made you feel small." I nodded. "I never needed your approval," I replied. "But thank you for finally seeing me." It was not closure, not reconciliation, but something shifted. Maybe not between us, but within her. And that was enough for now. Weeks passed and the dust settled. There were no grand apologies or dramatic changes. Diane did not suddenly become warm or maternal, but the sharp edge in her tone dulled. At the next family gathering, she asked me awkwardly but sincerely if I could recommend a few cookbooks. I never really learned, she admitted, eyes lowered. It was not reconciliation, not yet, but it was an opening. And maybe that is how healing starts. Not with fireworks or speeches, but with small acknowledgments that the mask has cracked and something real might emerge. Ethan and I talked often about that night, about how easy it would have been to stay silent, to let that dinner define me, to quietly shrink back into the background. But I had done that for years. Smiled through the subtle digs, sat out of family photos, accepted the passive exclusion like it was the cost of entry. That night at Lumiere changed everything, not because it brought revenge, but because it brought visibility. I was no longer willing to be the woman who waited to be invited. I was going to take my seat at every table I earned, and if that made people uncomfortable, so be it. The greatest lesson I learned was that you do not need to scream to be heard. You just need to stop apologizing for being in the room. Diane's power came from controlling the narrative. Mine came from reclaiming it. And maybe, just maybe, she saw that strength, not as a threat anymore, but as a mirror of her own long-buried courage. We are not best friends. We may never be. But now, when I speak, she listens. And sometimes that is more powerful than an apology. If you have ever been excluded, underestimated, or made to feel like you did not belong, this story is yours too. Remember, legacy is not built through approval. It is built through action, truth, and the courage to show up anyway. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more real stories about quiet power, earned respect, and the moments that change everything.